You just tell me a little bit about what you anticipated your session to be like before you got here.
Okay, I probably anticipated the session to be a fairly structured sort of problem-solving dialogue, sort of an open discussion, a fair chunk of the discussion to be sort of a deliberative phase. I probably expected a sort of a much greater sort of common basis from which people were working at the outset. So a bit of a sort of more consistent foundation than it actually was. And probably with a sort of a slightly hungrier attitude, I guess, to sort of deliver an outcome that mattered and added some value.
So what I'm hearing there is you were expecting real hard deliverables kind of at the end of the day.
Insight.
Insight.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Geoff?
Yeah, in a way, I guess the session we were on and this wider event embodies some of the tensions of the whole kind of open field. Is what's the how much structure and hierarchy and order do you need within openness to get results, etc. And we actually had a pretty open session. I think Rod's saying he'd have liked it probably a bit more structured, going through sort of questions and answers and issues and how much do we know and what don't we know, etc., and moving on. And there's an issue whenever you bring together this kind of galaxy of brain power which is in this thing. How do you get the most out of them? And my hunch is you probably do need a little bit more of what Rob was talking about, much more focused problem solving, a bit more orchestration, a bit more structure, in order to get the most out of these clever people who otherwise have including us, we have an infinite capacity to sort of talk abstractly and generalize and so on, but we need someone else to keep saying, hey, what do you actually mean? Hey, you know, what's the what does that mean for this particular live problem in a real place in real time?
I should have been in your session. So what? Tell me what. So I guess I'm hearing a little bit. Let's just get right to what you would like to be different. Let's say this is experiment one, right? And that's what we're calling an experiment, so that we can screw it up a little bit and then make it better the next time. You know, I think I have a good sense of what happened in your session, right? It was a kind of looser atmosphere than you would have necessarily anticipated. What would you change for experiment two?
I think I'd probably, having gone through experiment one, you would probably have a clearer sense of the purpose and what you actually want to get out of the next phase. It could go in a number of different directions, and I think that depending on the direction would probably determine who's participating in that experiment number two.
Can you be more specific about the purpose? What purpose for each session, or the purpose for the thing as a whole? Purpose
for the thing as a whole, and I guess what I'm getting at is I think people are here with slightly different purposes. So for some it seems to be about sort of potential institutional partnerships. For some it's actually getting at sort of very fundamental governance questions and sort of developing some insight and possibly some language around how we describe some of the things that are going on. And for others, I think it's a much more pragmatic and practical desire to actually develop an agenda that can evolve over time and can actually help people practically solve real problems and sort of become a repository of knowledge and capability development that enables or becomes something that can actually have a real impact on what people are doing in their jobs.
So with any group like this, part of me just wants to hear some really impressive people download a bit, you know, what's happening to the cutting edge of, let's say, personal identity technologies and their stacks, etc. Let's take one example where the best format is someone who really has a deep knowledge of it, just gives us 5-10 minutes of the best of their knowledge. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the value of that happening, and a bit of that happened in the last one actually in London, which I found really useful. And then there's a kind of live, say it's almost problem solving. So how do you run experimental labs? There's hundreds of them around the world, many of them, some great, some not so great. What have we learnt from that experience so that when a new city says we want to create an innovation lab, and many do, they don't just repeat the unnecessary mistakes. So I'd be keen to see a bit more of that, which requires quite a skeptical tone of voice from the kind of moderator or from parts of the conversation, and it's constantly interrogating the facts, the ideas, the experiences, and so
that was, I mean, one of the good features I think of yesterday's session was that why. I think that the technique of interrogation is actually is really powerful in teasing out issues, and really powerful in actually forcing people to explain what they're really trying to say.
And for people saying like me, I spend most of my life in very much sort of doing practical mode and don't actually get much chance to stand back and ask why. And coming to another country, into an event like this, you sort of want to be a little bit torn apart.
Yeah.
So you can then put the pieces back together again in a better way.
So what were some of the insights then that you kind of drew out over the past couple of days from the whys and the whys and the whys? Were you able to get some gems out of that?
We had some really, I mean, for me the best discussions were when there was a small group focusing on quite tangible, practical, was institutional design or program design. And if anything, I'd have liked to have had more of that, working in groups of 4 or 6 or 7, and I can't help learning lots from those kind of bits. Whereas, to be honest, when it's a more abstract conversation, I don't find I learn very much.
Yeah, I probably find that I actually get most out of some of the side conversations. So the one-on-one conversations, particularly where you have the opportunity, you might have it early on the first day and then you come back and have another conversation on the second day.
Can you tell me about one of your side conversations?
Yeah, so an interesting one was a discussion around that started as sort of a discussion around broadband networks and the nature of networks, and started as a technology question, but actually sort of late this afternoon actually sort of evolved into a space that was actually much more about social networks, was about how technology and social networks go together, about sort of some of the architecture and design that enables the collaboration space, and it was, and even through to sort of business models that are necessary and can sustain that kind of architecture, and sort of lined up with some of the other discussions around sort of characteristics of I guess the next generation, which are sort of much more in an open and sharing, passionate, quite a genuine space, experimental, happy to break the rules, happy to work around the system. And what does that mean for how we sort of set up spaces for collaboration and experimentation and innovation, and how do some of those attitudes of the next generation actually infiltrate the systems of today?
So we don't have much time, but I wanted you guys to talk about what you're going to take home with you now. Both of you have fairly long flights, some longer than others. And what are you going to be taking home? What kind of ideas and thoughts are you going to be coming away with you?
Well, I think that the grand program here, which people have expressed in slightly different ways, but is about how do we design the next generation of open, collaborative, problem-solving, systemic, blah, 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 tools for government, is one which I want to be part of. I want to learn the lessons from the very sort of technology design elements to what actually works in involving people, mayors, governments, etc. And there's a community committed to that project, and like Rod, it's probably lots of individual discussions have given me access to people who can be really useful for the bits which we're doing on the same task. I'm actually going not home but to Finland from here, where there's a lot of conversation about exactly the same space. One thing I would say is I think it's really important this is a genuinely global conversation. It still feels very English language speaking countries, and the vice of my country is we're pretty bad at learning from other countries. I think the US is in the same place, though nearly all the references in the reading materials are basically, mainly US and a little bit of UK and others, and this is exactly an example of a field where you've got to go much more global, much more open right from the start.
It's a very common thing that we're seeing, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'd agree really strongly with that. I think that one of the interesting observations for me is, and one of the most valuable things, is to sort of pick up on some of the nuance about the American debate and where it is, but equally, I think America in particular, and this is coming from a small country perspective, America in particular has a tendency to think that the answers lie in America, and therefore the academic publications that are cited, the people that are sort of brought to the table as the interesting innovators tend to be American. I think that there's enormous value in seeing a different cultural context, not because the lessons from the different cultural context will automatically apply to you back home, but just the more you see around diversity of different approaches in different situations, the more background knowledge that you've got, that it adds up in a cumulative sense, gives you sort of your almost a reservoir of experience and understanding that you draw on in entirely unexpected times, and it's sort of an equivalent of sort of having expertise in a number of different disciplines. Yep. It's the same thing in terms of the broader your base and the broader the visibility of what's around, the more you can actually get done in very subtle ways, and you draw on it in ways that, and in circumstances that are not predictable at all.
Yeah. I'd say your danger is your strength. The US is so strong in terms of brain power, universities, and very articulate kind of writers, that the odd effect of that is parochialism, and becoming much worse than other countries at recognizing what's going on in the rest of the world and how to learn from it. And this often happens, your strengths can become weaknesses.
I think those are really good lessons to learn. I thank you guys for your time.